200 wolves surround the crumbling cottage as the Alpha King shifts from dying wolf to man. Before her eyes, the rejected Omega who traded everything to save a stranger just discovered she didn't rescue a beast. She claimed a king, and he's calling her his mate. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. Whispers echo through the marketplace at dawn. Stories of the Omega who walked into a trap with her eyes wide open. The merchants still talk about it. The way she stood there bargaining for a creature that would probably kill her, trading away the only freedom she had left for something that made no sense to save. But here's what those merchants didn't know, what nobody could have predicted. That Omega wasn't saving a wolf, she was claiming a king. 3 days before everything changed, Kira Ashwood was doing what she did best, surviving. The rejection had happened 6 months ago, public and brutal, the way these things always seem to unfold when you're an Omega with nothing to offer, except a heart that beats too loud for its own good. Marcus Thornfield, Beta of the Red Moon Pack, had looked at her in front of witnesses and said the words that severed whatever pathetic bond they'd pretended to share. "You're not strong enough," he'd told her, as if strength was measured only in the ability to shift perfectly or fight without hesitation, as if kindness was a weakness that disqualified you from being loved. The pack had let her stay, technically. They'd given her a room barely bigger than a closet in the servants' quarters, let her work in the kitchens for food and shelter, reminded her daily through small cruelties that she existed on borrowed time and borrowed mercy. Kira had learned to make herself small, to move through spaces without drawing attention, to survive on the edges of a community that had made it clear she didn't belong at the center. She'd learned that survival sometimes meant swallowing your pride along with stale bread and pretending you didn't notice when people stopped talking the moment you entered a room. But Wednesday morning, when she'd gone to the market to buy vegetables for the pack house kitchen, survival took on a completely different meaning. The crowd had gathered near the south entrance, that restless kind of energy that meant something unusual was happening, something worth abandoning your morning routine to witness. Kira had tried to ignore it, had intended to just buy her vegetables and leave, but curiosity and the press of bodies had pulled her forward until she could see what held everyone's attention. The cage was iron, old and rusted in places, but sturdy enough to hold the massive wolf pacing inside it. The creature was huge, easily twice the size of a normal wolf, with fur so dark it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Even trapped and clearly weakened, the wolf radiated a power that made the crowd keep a respectful distance. That made even the bravest hunters look away when those golden eyes swept across them. The animal's ribs showed through its coat, evidence of days without food, and there were wounds along its flanks that looked infected, festering beneath matted fur. The trader standing beside the cage was a weaselly man, with sharp features and sharper eyes, the kind of person who saw profit in suffering and called it business. He was shouting to the crowd about rare specimens and exotic hunts, about how much meat a wolf this size would yield, how impressive the pelt would look mounted on someone's wall. The bids were climbing, hunters and wealthy pack members calling out numbers, arguing over who had the right to claim such a prize. Kira should have walked away. Every bit of common sense she possessed was screaming at her to buy her vegetables, return to the pack house, forget she'd ever seen this. The wolf was dangerous, clearly powerful even in its weakened state, and she had no business involving herself in something that could only end badly. She had survived 6 months of rejection by keeping her head down and her heart closed. This wasn't her problem. This wasn't her responsibility. but the wolf's eyes found hers in the crowd, and something passed between them that defied explanation. It wasn't recognition, exactly. More like a resonance, a frequency that matched something deep in her chest that had been silent since the rejection. The creature held her gaze for 3 heartbeats, and in that moment, Kira saw something that shouldn't have been possible in an animal's eyes. Awareness, intelligence, and underneath it all, a desperate, wordless plea. She moved before rational thought could stop her, pushing through the crowd until she stood at the front, close enough to smell the blood and infection from the wolf's wounds. The trader noticed her approach, his expression shifting from dismissive to calculating as he recognized easy prey. An omega, alone, with a kind of soft heart that could be exploited. How much? Kira heard herself ask, her voice steadier than she felt. The trader's smile was all teeth and no warmth. For you, miss, 500 silver. That was more money than Kira had seen in her entire life, more than she could earn in 5 years of kitchen work, more than any sane person would pay for a creature that would probably kill them the moment it was freed. The logical part of her brain was still screaming, still insisting this was madness. I don't have 500 silver, Kira said, and watched the trader's interest start to fade. But I have something else, something worth more. The trader's eyebrow raised, curiosity rekindled. And what might that be? My service contract. Kira pulled the paper from her pocket, the document that technically gave her a place in the Red Moon Pack for the next 10 years in exchange for labor. It's worth 7 years of guaranteed work. You could sell it to any pack that needs kitchen staff, cleaners, anyone willing to do the jobs nobody else wants. For a long moment, the trader just stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Then he started laughing, a sound that drew attention from the crowd, that made people turn to see what could possibly be so amusing. You want to trade your freedom, your guaranteed food and shelter and protection, for a wolf that'll probably tear your throat out the first chance it gets? Miss, that's the stupidest thing I've heard all week. Kira felt her face flush with embarrassment and shame, felt the weight of the crowd's judgment pressing down on her. But she didn't lower her eyes, didn't back away. Yes, that's exactly what I'm offering, the wolf for my contract. Take it or leave it. The trader's laughter faded as he realized she was serious. He glanced at the contract, at the official seals that marked it as legitimate, at the signatures that bound Kira to 10 years of service. Then he looked at the wolf, at the creature that was costing him money to feed and house, that no hunter had yet offered enough silver to make the trouble worthwhile. His calculating expression suggested he was doing math in his head, weighing options. 7 years is worth more than 500 silver from the right buyer, he said slowly. But you understand what you're giving up. No pack protection, no guaranteed meals, nothing but a wild animal that doesn't owe you loyalty or gratitude. Most people would call that a terrible trade. Most people haven't been rejected and left with nothing anyway, Kira replied, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. At least this way. I'm choosing what happens to me instead of waiting for someone else to decide my worth. Something shifted in the trader's expression, a flash of what might have been respect beneath the greed. He thrust out his hand. Deal. But don't come crying to me when that beast kills you. I'll want it in writing that you made this trade of your own free will. They drew up the papers right there in the marketplace, with witnesses to confirm that Kira Ashwood had voluntarily traded her service contract for one captured wolf, that she understood the risks, that no one had coerced or forced her into this decision. She signed her name at the bottom, watched the trader countersign, and felt the weight of what she'd just done settle onto her shoulders, like a physical thing. The trader opened the cage with a long pole, staying well back as the massive wolf limped out. The creature's golden eyes swept across the crowd, and Kira watched people stumble backward, instinctive fear overriding curiosity. But when those eyes landed on her, the wolf went still, just stood there, head lowered slightly, watching her with an intensity that should have been terrifying. "He's yours now," the trader said, already backing away like he expected violence to erupt at any moment. "Good luck. You're going to need it." The crowd was dispersing, the show over, people returning to their morning routines with new gossip to share. Kira stood alone in the marketplace, with a wolf that could kill her without effort, with no home to return to now that she'd traded away her contract, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a decision that everyone would call insane. The wolf took a step toward her, and Kira's heart hammered against her ribs. But the creature didn't attack. Instead, it lowered its massive head until it was level with her chest and made a sound that was almost like a whimper, pained and exhausted. Up close, Kira could see how bad the wounds really were, could smell the infection that was probably spreading through the animal's system. "You're hurt," she said softly, reaching out slowly, giving the wolf every chance to pull away or snap at her hand. When neither happened, when the creature actually leaned into her touch, Kira felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen since the rejection started to thaw. Okay, let's get you somewhere safe and figure out how to fix this." The cottage on the edge of neutral territory had been abandoned for years, a small structure that hunters sometimes used when they needed shelter between pack lands. Kira had discovered it months ago during one of her long walks, those times when staying in the pack house felt suffocating, and she needed to remember what freedom tasted like. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms with a leaky roof and broken windows, but it was shelter. It was something. Getting the wolf there took hours. The creature could barely walk, its strength clearly fading, and Kira had to stop frequently to let it rest. People they passed on the road stared, some with horror, some with pity, all with that look that said they were watching someone make a catastrophic mistake. But no one tried to stop her. No one offered to help. They just watched and whispered, and made Kira more certain with every step that she'd made the only choice that mattered. By the time they reached the cottage, the sun was setting and the wolf was barely conscious. Kira used what little money she had left to buy medical supplies from a sympathetic healer in the nearest village, an old woman who asked no questions but whose eyes held the kind of knowing that suggested she understood more than she said. Then Kira returned to the cottage and began the work of trying to save a creature that probably wouldn't survive the night. She cleaned the wounds first, using water boiled over a fire she'd built in the ancient hearth. The wolf lay on its side, breathing shallow and labored, occasionally making sounds of pain when Kira's ministrations touched something particularly damaged. She talked while she worked, a constant stream of words meant to soothe both the wolf and herself. "I don't know why I did this," she admitted as she packed one of the deeper gashes with healing herbs. "Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe 6 months of being rejected broke something in my brain, and now I make decisions that don't make any sense. But when I looked at you in that cage, when you looked back at me, it felt like the first real choice I'd made in half a year. Like the first time I did something because I wanted to, not because I was trying to survive or please someone or avoid being hurt." The wolf's golden eyes opened slightly, fixing on her face with that same intense awareness she'd seen in the marketplace. Kira continued working, her hands gentle despite her inexperience with this kind of healing. "My name is Kira," she said, Kira Ashwood, though the Ashwood part doesn't mean much anymore. My family died when I was young. I barely remember them. The pack took me in, raised me, and I thought that meant I belonged. I thought when Marcus chose me as his intended mate, it meant I'd finally found my place. She laughed bitterly. Turns out I was wrong about all of it. He rejected me because I'm not a strong fighter, because I can't shift as fast as other Omegas, because I care too much about things that don't matter in pack politics. The wolf made a sound that might have been disagreement, and Kira felt tears starting to fall, despite her best efforts to hold them back. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me," she said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm telling you because you're the first living creature in 6 months that's looked at me like I might be worth something. Even if you don't understand my words, even if you're just a wolf without human thoughts, you haven't looked away. You haven't decided I'm not worth your time. And I guess I needed that more than I needed a guaranteed place to sleep." She finished bandaging the worst of the wounds as the moon rose outside the broken windows, casting silver light across the cottage floor. The wolf's breathing had steadied slightly, suggesting maybe, possibly, it might survive after all. Kira settled against the wall near the fire, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "If you live through this," she said quietly, "you're free to go. I didn't save you to cage you somewhere else. I saved you because leaving you there felt wrong, because I know what it's like to be trapped in a situation where everyone's decided your fate without asking what you want. So when you're strong enough, you can leave. Find your pack, or whatever wolves do. Just know that for one night someone thought you were worth saving." The wolf's eyes stayed fixed on her face until sleep finally claimed her, and Kira's last conscious thought was that she'd probably wake up dead or alone, possibly both. She woke to warmth and the smell of smoke from a rekindled fire. For a moment, Kira couldn't remember where she was or why every muscle in her body ached. Then memory returned in a rush. The marketplace, the trade, the wounded wolf. She sat up quickly, looking for the creature she'd brought here, expecting to find it gone, or worse. What she found instead made her breath catch in her throat. The wolf was still there, lying near the fire. But it wasn't alone. Surrounding the cottage, visible through the broken windows and the gaps in the walls, were eyes. Dozens of pairs of eyes reflecting the firelight, all fixed on the cottage with an intensity that made Kira's skin prickle. Wolves. Not just one or two, but what looked like an entire pack, maybe more. They were silent, motionless, watching with a patience that suggested they'd been there for hours. Waiting. The wolf in the cottage stirred, its golden eyes opening to meet Kira's gaze. And then, as she watched in shock, the creature's form began to shimmer and change. The transformation was nothing like the clumsy, painful shifts Kira had witnessed from young pack members learning to control their forms. This was fluid, graceful, ancient power made manifest. Within seconds, the massive wolf had become a man, and not just any man. Even injured and exhausted, even covered in bandages that Kira had applied with shaking hands, he radiated an authority that made her Omega nature want to submit on pure instinct. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. Sharp features, dark hair, and those same golden eyes that had held her gaze in the marketplace. "Hello, Kira Ashwood," he said, his voice rough from disuse but carrying a weight that suggested he was used to being obeyed. "My name is Damon Nightshade, and I believe we need to talk about the rather extraordinary thing you did yesterday." Kira pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing. "You're not just a wolf." It came out as barely more than a whisper. "You're a shifter. You understood everything I said. Every word, Demon confirmed, managing to sit up despite obvious pain. Every confession, every truth you shared while you thought you were talking to an animal that couldn't comprehend human speech. And Kira, I need you to understand something before those wolves outside decide to come in here. I'm not just any shifter. I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. And you, without knowing it, just saved the life of the most powerful wolf in existence. The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. Alpha Kings didn't get captured by traders and sold in marketplaces. They didn't end up wounded and caged and dying. They definitely didn't let random Omegas trade their freedom for them without revealing who they were. That's impossible, Kira managed. If you're the Alpha King, where were your guards? Your pack? Why were you in a cage? Ambush, Demon said shortly. Rogues with silver weapons and enough planning to separate me from my protection. They sold me to that trader before my people could track me down. I was too weak from the silver poisoning to shift back, too injured to fight my way free. I was preparing to die in that cage when you walked up and did the most foolishly brave thing I've seen in 2 centuries of life. 2 centuries. Kira's mind was reeling. You're over 200 years old. You're actually the Alpha King. And I traded my service contract for, you like you were a pet. Demon's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it wasn't so sharp. You traded your freedom for mine without knowing who I was or what I could offer in return. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How unusual it is to find someone who acts from pure compassion rather than calculated gain? I wasn't being compassionate, Kira protested. I was being stupid. Everyone said so. The trader said so. The people in the market said so. The trader is an idiot who couldn't recognize value if it bit him, Demon replied. And the people in the market are wolves who've grown so comfortable that they've forgotten what courage looks like. You saw a creature suffering, and you gave up everything you had to ease that suffering. That's not stupid, Kira. That's extraordinary. A sound outside made them both turn toward the door. The wolves were moving, circling closer, and through the gaps in the walls, Kira could see there were far more than she'd initially thought. 50, maybe more, all watching the cottage with the kind of focused attention that preceded either violence or something equally intense. Those are my wolves, Demon explained, pushing himself to his feet with obvious effort. They've been tracking me since the ambush, searching everywhere. They found me last night, felt the bond when I was finally strong enough to reach out through the pack connection. He looked at Kira with an expression she couldn't read. They're here to bring me home. To bring their king back where he belongs. Kira's throat felt tight. So you're leaving? Of course you're leaving. You have a kingdom to run, a pack to lead. I'm glad you're going to be okay. Demon was silent for a long moment, those golden eyes studying her face like he was trying to memorize every detail. Then he said something that made Kira's world tilt on its axis. I'm not leaving without you. When you traded your service contract for my life, when you gave up your guaranteed safety to save a creature you thought was just a wolf, you bound yourself to me in ways that go deeper than legal documents. The mate bond formed last night while you were sleeping, while I was healing from wounds that should have killed me. You're not just the Omega who saved the Alpha King, Kira. You're my mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself. The words hit like a physical blow. Mate bond with the Alpha King. It was impossible. It was insane. It was exactly the kind of fairy tale that didn't happen to rejected Omegas with no status and nothing to offer. No, Kira said, shaking her head. No, that's not possible. I was already rejected once. The bond was broken. I can't be someone's mate again, and I definitely can't be your mate. You're the Alpha King. I'm nobody. Demon crossed the space between them in 3 strides, despite his injuries, his hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. You were rejected by someone who was never your true mate, he said firmly. The moon, goddess, doesn't make mistakes, Kira. If Marcus could reject you, it's because you were never meant to be his. You were meant to be mine. But I don't know how to be a queen, Kira whispered, tears streaming down her face. I can't shift properly. I'm not strong or powerful or politically savvy. I'm just an Omega who works in kitchens and makes terrible decisions like trading her freedom for wolves. You're an Omega who saw suffering and chose compassion over self-preservation, Demon corrected. Who gave up everything she had for a creature she thought couldn't even thank her. Who spent a night tending wounds and sharing truths with someone she believed would never repeat them. That's not weakness, Kira. That's the strongest thing I've ever witnessed. Outside, the wolves had formed a circle around the cottage, and through the walls Kira could feel their presence like a physical weight. Hundreds of them now, she realized. Not just 50. They'd been arriving all night, drawn by their king's summons, ready to escort him home. I'm scared, Kira admitted, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. I'm scared of being rejected again, of not being good enough, of failing at something so important that everyone will see what Marcus saw, that I'm not worth choosing. Then we'll be scared together, Demon replied, and there was something almost vulnerable in his expression. Because I'm terrified too, Kira. I'm terrified that after 200 years of searching for my mate, I'll somehow fail to show her how precious she is, how valued, how absolutely necessary to everything I want to build. He stepped back, giving her space, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute sincerity. I'm not asking you to accept the bond right now. I'm not demanding you come with me or be my queen or make any decisions while you're overwhelmed and frightened, but I am asking for a chance to show you what your life could be, a chance to prove that the moon goddess knew exactly what she was doing when she paired us, a chance to demonstrate that you're not nobody. You're the most important person in my kingdom, and I'll spend however long it takes making sure you believe it. Kira looked at him, at this powerful alpha who was offering her everything she'd ever dreamed of and several things she'd never dared to imagine. Outside, 200 wolves waited to escort their king home. Inside, a rejected Omega stood at a crossroads between the life she'd known and a future she couldn't predict. What happens if I say yes? She asked quietly. If I agree to come with you, to give this a chance. Demon's smile was gentle and genuine. Then we go home together. You meet my pack, my advisors, the wolves who've been waiting decades for their king to find his mate. You learn what it means to be Luna, but at your own pace, without pressure or judgment. And Kira, I promise you this, no matter what you decide about the mate bond, whether you ever fully accept me or not, you'll never have to trade your freedom for survival again. You'll never have to make yourself small to fit someone else's expectations. You'll be valued for exactly who you are. And if I can't do it, if I'm not strong enough to be what you need, then we'll figure it out together, Demon said. But I don't think that's going to be a problem. I've seen your strength, Kira. You just don't recognize it yet. Kira took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She could refuse, could stay in this cottage, find work in the village, build a life on her own terms without the complications of mate bonds and royal politics. It would be safe, quiet, simple. But when had simple ever been what she truly wanted? When had safe ever made her feel alive the way she'd felt yesterday in the marketplace, making an insane decision that everyone called stupid, but that had felt more right than anything she'd done in months? "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, I'll come with you. I'll give this a chance. But Demon, you need to understand something. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to doubt myself. I'm going to be scared and overwhelmed and probably terrible at being royal. Then you'll be exactly like every other good leader who's ever existed," Demon replied. "The ones who doubt themselves are the ones who try harder to do right by their people. Come on. 200 wolves are waiting to meet the woman brave enough to trade everything for their king." As they stepped out of the cottage together, Kira saw the full extent of what Demon had summoned. The forest was filled with wolves, more than she'd ever seen in one place, all watching her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to respect to outright reverence. These were his people, his pack, his kingdom made manifest, and they were waiting for her. The largest wolf, a massive silver creature with scars across its muzzle, approached slowly. Kira felt Demon's hand settle reassuringly on the small of her back as the wolf stopped directly in front of her, golden eyes studying her face. Then, deliberately, the creature lowered its head in a gesture of respect that sent murmurs through the assembled pack. "That's Mordecai," Demon explained softly. "My second in command and oldest friend. He's acknowledging you as Luna, as someone worthy of respect and protection. The others will follow his lead." One by one, the wolves began to approach, each offering their own gesture of acknowledgement. Some lowered their heads, some touched their noses to her hand, some simply stood close enough for her to feel their warmth and know she was accepted. And through it all, Kira felt something inside her chest beginning to thaw completely. That frozen place the rejection had created starting to warm with possibility. She'd traded her freedom for a captured wolf and gained a kingdom in return. She'd given up everything she had and discovered she was worth infinitely more than she'd believed. She'd made what everyone called the stupidest decision possible and found her true mate in the process. The rejected Omega who'd walked into a trap with her eyes open hadn't saved just a wolf. She'd saved a king, and in doing so, she'd saved herself. But here's the thing nobody tells you about fairy tales. The happy ending isn't the end at all. It's just the beginning of a much more complicated story. The journey to the Northern Territory took 3 days, and every mile reminded Kira of just how far she'd stepped outside the world she knew. They traveled as a procession, 200 wolves moving through the forest like a living tide, with Kira riding on Demon's back in his wolf form, because he'd insisted she needed to conserve her strength, and she'd been too overwhelmed to argue. The other wolves flanked them on all sides, a protective formation that made it clear anyone who threatened their Luna would face an army. Kira had never felt safer. She'd also never felt more terrified. Because with each passing hour, the reality of what she'd agreed to became more concrete and more impossible to ignore. She was going to be queen of the Northern Territories. A rejected Omega who couldn't shift properly and had spent 6 months working in kitchens was supposed to lead alongside the most powerful Alpha in existence. The doubt crept in during the quiet moments. When they stopped to rest, and Demon would shift back to human form to check on her, asking if she needed anything with a gentleness that made her chest ache. When Mordecai, the massive silver wolf who served as second in command, would bring her food with a reverence that suggested he saw something in her she couldn't see in herself. When the other wolves would watch her with expressions that held hope and expectation and absolute faith that she was exactly what their pack needed. What if she wasn't? What if everyone was making a terrible mistake and she failed spectacularly in front of hundreds of witnesses? What if the mate bond was real, but she was too broken from the rejection to ever fully accept it? What if Demon woke up one day and realized he'd bound himself to someone fundamentally inadequate? The questions circled in her mind like vultures, and she could feel the old familiar weight of unworthiness settling back onto her shoulders. By the time they reached the palace on the evening of the third day, Kira had almost convinced herself to run. To tell Demon this was a mistake, that he deserved better, that she couldn't do this. Then she saw the palace, and the words died in her throat. It wasn't the massive stone fortress she'd expected, all cold walls and intimidating architecture designed to remind visitors of their insignificance. Instead, it was built into the side of a mountain, organic and beautiful, with terraces that overlooked forests stretching to the horizon and buildings that seemed to grow from the rock itself rather than being imposed upon it. Lights glowed in windows like stars, and she could see wolves moving through courtyards and gardens, a community rather than a court. "Home," Demon said, shifting back to human form beside her. He'd materialized clothes from somewhere, one of those alpha tricks she'd never quite understood, and now he stood watching her reaction with an expression that suggested her opinion mattered more than anything else. "What do you think?" "It's beautiful," Kira admitted, because there was no other word for it. "But Demon, I don't belong here. Look at this place. Look at these wolves. They're expecting a queen, and I'm just someone who made an impulsive decision in a marketplace." Demon's hand found hers, his fingers lacing through her own with a naturalness that suggested they'd been doing this for years rather than days. They're expecting someone who saved their king's life without asking for anything in return. Someone brave enough to give up everything for a stranger. Someone compassionate enough to spend a night tending wounds and sharing truths with a creature who couldn't respond. And Kira, that's exactly who you are. Before she could respond, a group of wolves emerged from the palace entrance, moving with the kind of purposeful grace that marked them as important. At the front was an older woman with silver hair and eyes that held centuries of wisdom, flanked by younger wolves who carried themselves with the confidence of experienced warriors. They approached Demon with obvious relief and respect, but their eyes kept drifting to Kira, with expressions she couldn't quite read. "Your Majesty," the older woman said, bowing deeply. "Thank the goddess you're safe. When we felt the bond go silent, when we couldn't track you, we feared the worst." "I nearly met the worst," Demon replied, his hand tightening around Kira's. But someone rather extraordinary intervened. "Ilara, Mordecai, warriors of the Northern Guard, may I present Kira Ashwood, the Omega, who traded her freedom to save my life, the woman who spent a night tending wounds she had no obligation to heal. The mate the moon goddess chose for me after 2 centuries of searching." The silence that followed was absolute. Kira watched the wolves' expressions shift from confusion to shock to something that looked almost like joy. The older woman, Ilara, was staring at her with tears streaming down her weathered face. "A mate," she breathed, "after all these years. Oh, Your Majesty, she's perfect. Look at her. She has your mother's eyes, that same fierce gentleness, and the courage to trade everything for a stranger. That's the mark of a true Luna." Kira felt her face flush with embarrassment. "I'm not perfect. I'm really not. I can't shift properly. I have no political experience. I worked in kitchens for 6 months because I was rejected and had nowhere else to go. You're all making a mistake." Ilara stepped forward, and up close Kira could see that the older woman was crying openly now. Child, she said gently, taking Kira's free hand in both of her own. I have served this pack for 90 years. I watched our king grow from a pup to the leader he is today. I have seen him search endlessly for his mate, hope fading with each passing decade. And now you stand here trying to convince us that you're not good enough, when the fact that you're arguing against your own value is proof of your worth. How does that make sense? Kira asked, her voice breaking. Ilara smiled. Because wolves, who are truly unworthy, never question their value. They assume they deserve everything and give nothing in return. But you, who gave everything without expecting anything, you doubt yourself. That tells me you have the heart of a true leader. Someone who will always put her people before her pride. The other wolves were nodding, and Kira felt overwhelmed by the weight of their acceptance. These weren't wolves looking at her with pity or judgment. These were wolves looking at her with hope, with relief, with genuine happiness that their king had finally found his mate. Come, Demon said softly, tugging her gently toward the palace entrance. Let me show you our home. Let me introduce you to the wolves who've been waiting for someone exactly like you. The palace interior was even more beautiful than the exterior, all natural stone and wood, with tapestries depicting wolf history and windows that framed the forest like living paintings. Wolves stopped what they were doing as Demon led her through corridors, and word spread quickly. The king had returned. He'd brought his mate. She'd saved his life. She'd traded her freedom for him without knowing who he was. The whispers followed them, but they weren't cruel. They were curious, excited, full of a warmth that Kira had never experienced in the Red Moon Pack. These wolves didn't see her as an inconvenience or a weak link. They saw her as their Luna, as someone who belonged here, as someone they wanted to know. Demon took her to a suite of rooms that overlooked the forest, with a massive bed piled with furs, and a bathroom that had actual hot running water and windows that could be opened to let in the mountain air. Your rooms, he explained, connected to mine through that door there, but with your own space, your own privacy. You're not trapped here, Kira. You can come and go as you please, decorate however you like, make this space truly yours. Kira walked through the room slowly, touching fabrics that were softer than anything she'd ever owned, looking at furnishings that were more elegant than anything she'd ever imagined having. There were books on shelves, clearly chosen for her, clothes in the wardrobe that looked like they'd fit perfectly, fresh flowers in vases near the windows. How did you do all this in 3 days? She asked. You were traveling with me the entire time. Demon smiled slightly. I have very efficient staff. The moment I told them I'd found my mate, they prepared everything. They wanted you to feel welcome, to feel like this was already home. The kindness of it made Kira's throat tight with emotion. For 6 months, she'd lived in a tiny room barely bigger than a closet, surviving on scraps and working endless hours just to justify her existence. Now she had rooms that were larger than most houses, filled with things meant to make her comfortable, given freely without expectation of anything in return. I don't understand why everyone is being so nice to me, she whispered. I haven't done anything to earn this. You saved my life, Demon said simply. You gave up everything you had without knowing what you'd receive in return. That's earned, Kira, more than earned. A knock on the door interrupted them, and Ilara entered with a group of female wolves carrying trays of food and pitchers of what smelled like herbal tea. We thought the lady might be hungry after her journey, the older woman said, directing the others to set everything on a low table near the windows. And perhaps tired. We can prepare a bath if she'd like, or leave her to rest. Thank you, Kira managed, overwhelmed by the attention. But you don't have to call me lady. I'm just Kira. Alara exchanged glances with Demon, something passing between them that Kira couldn't interpret. With respect, Luna Kira, you're not just anything. You're the mate of our king, and we'll honor you accordingly. But if you prefer less formality in private, we can certainly accommodate that. After the wolves had left and Kira had eaten more food than she'd consumed in weeks, Demon settled beside her on the low couch near the windows. There's something I need to tell you, he said carefully. Something about what happened with the ambush, about why I was captured. Kira felt a chill run through her. What happened? It wasn't random, Demon explained. The rogues who attacked me, they were sent by someone. Someone who doesn't want me to have a mate, who sees my search as a weakness that can be exploited. When word gets out that I've finally found you, when it becomes public knowledge that the Northern Territory has a Luna again, there will be wolves who see that as a threat. Kira's breath caught. You're saying I'm in danger. I'm saying we both are, Demon corrected. But Kira, I won't let anyone hurt you. The 200 wolves who escorted us here, they're just a fraction of the forces I can summon. You'll have protection, guards, everything you need to stay safe. But the danger exists because of me, Kira said, the old familiar guilt creeping in. If you hadn't found me, if I hadn't agreed to come here, you wouldn't have this problem. Demon's expression turned fierce. If you hadn't agreed to come here, I'd still be hunting for you. I'd still be incomplete. I'd still be vulnerable to exactly the same enemies who would see any mate of mine as a target. This isn't your fault, Kira. This is the reality of ruling, of having power that others want. The only difference is now I have something worth protecting beyond just myself. The weight of it settled over Kira like a physical thing. She wasn't just accepting a mate bond, she was stepping into the middle of political machinations she didn't understand, becoming a target for enemies she'd never met, putting herself in a position where her very existence made Demon more vulnerable. I think I need some time alone, she said quietly, to process everything, to think about what this really means. Demon studied her face for a long moment, then nodded and stood. Of course, but Kira, before I go, I need you to understand something. Whatever you're thinking right now, whatever doubts are circling in that beautiful mind, they're not the truth. You're not a burden. You're not making things worse. You're the best thing that's happened to me in 200 years, and I'll prove that to you for as long as it takes. After he left, Kira sat alone in rooms that were too beautiful for someone like her, looking out at a kingdom she had no idea how to lead, feeling the weight of a mate bond she wasn't sure she deserved. The rejection had taught her that love was conditional, that value was measured in strength and status and political advantage. 6 months of survival had taught her to make herself small, to expect nothing, to be grateful for scraps. How was she supposed to unlearn all of that? How was she supposed to believe she was worthy of this when every experience she'd had suggested otherwise? Sleep came eventually, but it was restless and filled with dreams of Marcus's rejection, of crowds laughing at her, of Demon looking at her with the same disgust Marcus had shown. She woke before dawn, heart racing, and knew she couldn't stay in these rooms another moment. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to remember who she was before all of this happened. The palace was quiet at this hour, most wolves still sleeping. Kira slipped out of her rooms and made her way through corridors she barely remembered from the previous night, following instinct more than memory. She found herself in a garden, terraced into the mountainside, with paths winding between flowering plants and small trees. The pre-dawn light was turning the sky purple and gold, and for a moment, Kira could almost pretend she was back in the simple cottage, before mate bonds and kingdoms and impossible expectations. "You're up early," a voice said, and Kira spun to find Mordecai approaching in human form. The massive second-in-command looked less intimidating in the soft morning light, though his scarred face still carried the weight of years of battle. "Couldn't sleep," Kira admitted. "Everything is it's a lot." Mordecai settled onto a bench near where she stood, gesturing for her to join him. "I've known Damin for 70 years, he said conversationally. "I've watched him lead through wars and peace, triumph and tragedy. I've seen him strong and I've seen him broken. And I've never, in all that time, seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. That doesn't mean I'm right for this," Kira protested. "That doesn't mean I won't fail." Mordecai smiled slightly. "You know what I see when I look at you, Luna? I see someone who's already proven herself in the way that matters most. Not through fighting or political maneuvering or displays of power, but through the simple act of seeing suffering and choosing compassion over self-interest." The trader called it the stupidest thing he'd ever seen, Kira said bitterly. "Everyone in the marketplace thought I was insane. Maybe they were right. The trader was a man who sees value only in silver," Mordecai replied. "His opinion is worth exactly as much as his character, which is to say nothing at all. But you saw value where others saw only inconvenience. You gave freely when others would have walked away. That's not stupidity. That's wisdom of a kind this world desperately needs." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun rose fully, painting the garden in shades of gold. Kira found herself relaxing despite her anxiety, found comfort in Mordecai's steady presence. "Can I tell you something?" she asked quietly. "When Marcus rejected me, he said I wasn't strong enough to stand beside a beta, that my soft heart was a weakness that would get people killed, and part of me has believed that for 6 months. Part of me thinks he was right. Marcus was an idiot who confused cruelty with strength," Mordecai said bluntly. "Real strength isn't the absence of compassion. It's choosing compassion even when it would be easier to be cold. You proved that in the marketplace, Kira. You chose the harder path because it was the right one. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Demon would spend mornings handling kingdom business, meeting with advisors and dealing with the endless administrative work of ruling. Kira would use this time to explore the palace, getting to know wolves who would stop to talk with her, who would share stories about the pack's history or ask her opinion on things she had no business having opinions about. Afternoons, Demon insisted on spending with her, teaching her about pack politics and kingdom management, but also just talking, sharing stories, learning about each other in the way mates should. Ilara became a constant presence, gently guiding Kira through the expectations of being Luna, without ever making her feel inadequate. The older woman taught her the formal protocols for ceremonies, the informal dynamics of pack relationships, the history of the Northern Territory that stretched back centuries. But more than that, Ilara taught her that being Luna wasn't about perfection. It was about caring for your people, about making decisions with their welfare in mind, about showing up even when you were scared. The mate bond grew stronger with each passing day, a warm thread of connection that let Kira feel Demon's emotions when he was close. She could sense his satisfaction when she laughed at something he said, his contentment when they walked through the gardens together, his fierce protectiveness when anyone looked at her with anything less than absolute respect. And slowly, carefully, she began to feel her own emotions shifting. The fear didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else: affection, trust, the beginning of what might eventually become love. 3 weeks after her arrival, Demon announced that it was time for her formal presentation to the assembled nobility, the moment when she would be officially introduced as his chosen mate and future queen. Kira felt panic spike through her chest at the news. "I'm not ready," she told him that night as they sat together in the garden that had become their favorite meeting place. "I don't know the right things to say, the right way to act. What if I mess this up? What if I prove everyone wrong who believes in me?" Demon took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Then you'll prove you're human. You'll prove you're real. Kira, the nobles aren't expecting perfection. They're expecting honesty. They're expecting someone who cares about this kingdom and its people. And you've already shown them that just by being who you are. But what if I freeze? What if I can't speak? What if I do something that embarrasses you? Then I'll stand beside you and we'll handle it together," Demon said firmly. "But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're going to walk into that room and show everyone exactly why the moon goddess chose you to be my mate." The presentation ceremony was held in the Great Hall, a massive space that could hold hundreds of wolves comfortably. Kira stood in an antechamber, wearing a dress that Alara had helped her choose, simple but elegant in deep forest green that complemented her coloring. Through the doors, she could hear the assembled nobles, could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. "You're going to be magnificent," Alara said, adjusting the simple silver circlet that marked Kira as Luna. "Just remember, these wolves already love you. They've heard the story of how you saved their king. They're not here to judge you. They're here to celebrate you." The doors opened, and Diamond was waiting, dressed in formal clothes that somehow made him look even more regal and intimidating. But when his eyes met Kira's, when he smiled with genuine warmth and offered his hand, the intimidation faded. This was just Demon, her mate, the wolf who'd spent 3 weeks showing her patience and kindness and absolute faith in her worth. "Ready?" he asked softly. "As I'll ever be," Kira replied, taking his hand. They entered the Great Hall together, and Kira felt hundreds of eyes turned toward her. The crowd was massive, nobles from across the Northern Territory who'd traveled to witness this moment. She could see curiosity in their faces, assessment, and yes, some skepticism. But underneath it all, she could feel something else: hope. These wolves wanted her to succeed. They wanted to believe their king had finally found his true mate. Demon led her to the raised platform at the far end of the hall, where 2 thrones sat side by side. He helped her ascend the steps, his hand steady on her lower back, his presence a constant reassurance. When they reached the top, he turned to face the assembled crowd, and his voice rang out with absolute authority. "Wolves of the Northern Territory," he began. 3 weeks ago, I was ambushed by rogues who sought to end my life. They separated me from my guards, poisoned me with silver, and left me to die in a cage in some trader's marketplace. I was prepared to meet that death with whatever dignity I could muster. And then an Omega I'd never met walked up to that cage and did something extraordinary. He turned to look at Kira, and the love in his expression made her breath catch. She traded her freedom for mine, gave up her service contract, her guaranteed shelter and food, everything she had in the world, to save a creature she thought was just a dying wolf. She spent a night tending my wounds, talking to me, showing me a compassion I haven't witnessed in 2 centuries of life. And in doing so, she proved herself worthy of something I'd been searching for my entire existence. The mate bond formed that night, chosen by the moon goddess herself. He took Kira's hand, raising it high so the assembled nobles could see them joined. I present to you Kira Ashwood, Omega of No Pack, savior of your king, and the Luna, the moon goddess has given to the Northern Territory. She comes to us without political connections or ancient bloodlines. She comes with only her courage, her compassion, and her absolute refusal to let suffering continue when she has the power to ease it. And I tell you now, that makes her more qualified to lead beside me than any noble-born wolf could ever be. The crowd was silent for a long moment, and Kira felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it, the moment when they would either accept her or reject her, the moment when she would discover if Demon's faith in her was justified or misplaced. Then Mordecai stepped forward from his place among the guards and dropped to one knee. I pledge my loyalty to Luna Kira Ashwood, he said, his voice carrying through the hall, and I swear to protect her with my life, as she protected our king with her freedom. One by one, the other wolves began to kneel. First the guards, then the palace staff, then the nobles, until the entire hall was filled with wolves bowing to her, pledging their loyalty, accepting her as their Luna. Tears streamed down Kira's face as she watched, as the weight of their acceptance settled over her like a blanket. Thank you, she managed, her voice shaking but clear. I know I'm not what you expected. I know I have so much to learn. But I promise you this. I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of this honor. I'll work to understand your needs, to help where I can, to lead with the same compassion I showed to a dying wolf in a cage. I don't have noble blood or political experience, but I have a heart that breaks at suffering and hands that will reach out to ease pain wherever I find it. And I hope, I really hope, that will be enough. The applause that erupted was deafening, and Kira felt Demon's arms slide around her waist, pulling her close. You did perfectly, he murmured against her ear. Absolutely perfectly. The celebration that followed lasted late into the night, with nobles approaching to pledge their individual loyalty, to share their stories, to welcome her into the pack. Kira met so many wolves she lost track of names, but she remembered faces and small details they shared. A mother grateful for new policies protecting Omega rights. A young warrior excited about proposed changes to training. An elder pleased that their king had finally found his mate. These weren't faceless nobles. These were people with hopes and fears and lives she was now responsible for helping to protect. As the party wound down and wolves began to drift home, Demon led Kira back to her rooms. They stood together on the balcony, looking out at the forest bathed in moonlight, and Kira felt the mate bond humming contentedly between them. I have something I need to tell you, Demon said quietly. About the wolves who ambushed me, about the threat I mentioned. We've identified who sent them. Kira turned to face him, seeing the tension in his shoulders. Who? A rival pack to the south, led by an alpha named Raziel Darkwater. He's been trying to expand his territory for years, and he sees my search for a mate as proof that I'm distracted, weakened by sentiment. Now that I've found you, he's going to push harder, test our borders, look for vulnerabilities. So I am making things more dangerous, Kira said, the old guilt rising. Demon's hands came up to frame her face, his golden eyes intense on hers. No, you're giving me something worth fighting for. Before you, I was going through the motions of ruling, doing what needed to be done but feeling no real connection to it. Now I have a reason to build something better, to create a kingdom worth passing on. You're not my weakness, Kira, you're my strength. But what if something happens to me? What if Raziel finds a way to use me against you? Then I'll destroy him and anyone who helps him. Demon replied simply. But Kira, That's not going to happen. You have the full might of the Northern Territory protecting you. You have 200 personal guards who've sworn to die before letting harm come to you. You have me, and I promise you, no one gets past me to hurt what's mine." The fierce possessiveness in his voice should have been frightening. Instead, it made Kira feel safe in a way she'd never experienced. She'd spent 6 months believing she wasn't worth protecting, that her value was measured in how little trouble she caused, but Damon was showing her a different truth, that she was worth fighting for, that her safety mattered, that she was precious in ways that had nothing to do with political advantage or Omega status. "I'm starting to believe you," she said softly, "about me being worthy, about this being right. I'm not all the way there yet, but I'm getting closer." "That's all I ask," Demon replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Take your time. Heal at your own pace. I'll be here for all of it." The attack came 2 weeks later, sudden and vicious. Kira was in the gardens with Alara, learning about medicinal herbs, when the warning horn sounded. The older woman's expression shifted instantly from peaceful to alert, and she grabbed Kira's arm, pulling her toward the palace entrance. "What's happening?" Kira asked, her heart racing. "Raiders at the south border," Alara said shortly. "Probably Raziel testing our defenses. We need to get you somewhere secure." "But Demon, he'll be out there fighting, won't he?" "Yes, and he needs to know you're safe so he can focus on protecting our people. Come, Luna, please." They made it inside just as the first explosion shook the palace walls. Kira was hustled down corridors she'd never seen before, into a reinforced chamber deep in the mountain where other high-value wolves were being gathered. Guards stood at every entrance, weapons drawn, faces grim. The waiting was torture. Kira could hear the sounds of battle echoing through the stone, could feel the fear of the wolves around her, could sense through the mate bond that Demon was engaged in combat somewhere. The bond pulsed with his fury and determination, with the primal satisfaction of an alpha defending his territory. But there was no fear, just absolute certainty that he would protect what was his. Hours passed like days. Reports came periodically. The raiders had been driven back. Casualties were minimal. The king was unharmed. Raziel himself had appeared on the battlefield, but retreated when it became clear he was outnumbered. And finally, the all-clear signal. The battle was over and the palace was secure. When Demon came to collect her from the safe room, he was covered in blood that she desperately hoped wasn't his. But his golden eyes were blazing with triumph and relief, and the moment he saw her, he crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. "You're safe," he breathed against her hair. "Thank the goddess you're safe." "I'm fine," Kira assured him. "Ilara got me here. The guards protected everyone." "But Demon, are you hurt? Is everyone okay?" "Minor injuries only," he replied, pulling back to look at her face. "Raziel was testing us, seeing how we'd respond. He won't make the mistake of underestimating us again." The message he sent was clear, but so is ours. Anyone who threatens this kingdom, anyone who threatens you, will face the full force of the Northern Territory. That night, as they sat together in Kira's rooms, the adrenaline finally wearing off, Demon admitted something he'd been holding back. "I was terrified," he said quietly. "When the horn sounded, when I knew there was fighting and you were somewhere in the palace, I've never felt fear like that in 200 years. The thought of losing you, of something happening before I could get to you, it nearly broke me." "But you didn't break," Kira said, taking his hand. "You led your wolves. You protected your people. You did exactly what you needed to do because you trusted that I'd be kept safe." Demon's laugh was shaky. "You're right. But Kira, I need you to understand something. If it came down to a choice between the kingdom and you, between my duty and your safety, I'd choose you every time. That probably makes me a terrible king, or it makes you someone who understands that some things matter more than kingdoms, Kira replied. She took a deep breath, feeling the rightness of what she was about to say. I'm ready to accept the bond fully, to be your mate in truth, not just in name, to stop holding back because I'm scared of being hurt again. Demon's eyes widened. Are you certain? I don't want you to decide because of tonight's attack, because of fear or adrenaline or anything except genuine choice. I'm deciding because I've spent 3 weeks watching you be patient and kind and absolutely certain of my worth even when I couldn't see it myself. I'm deciding because you've shown me that love isn't conditional, that value isn't measured in strength or status or political advantage. I'm deciding because when those horns sounded today, my first thought wasn't about my own safety. It was about yours, about getting to you, about making sure you knew you weren't alone in this fight. She moved closer, her hands coming up to frame his face the way he'd done to her so many times. I love you, Demon Nightshade, not because you're the Alpha King or because of the mate bond or because you saved me from a life of rejection, but because you're you, because you see me as something precious, because you've given me space to heal while never letting me forget that I'm valued, because you've shown me that the compassion Marcus called weakness is actually the greatest strength I possess. The kiss they shared sealed the bond completely, and Kira felt it snap into place with an intensity that took her breath away. This wasn't the pale shadow of connection she'd felt with Marcus. This was fire and lightning, and coming home to a place she'd never been, but had always been searching for. Through the bond, she could feel Demon's love, his relief, his absolute conviction that she was exactly what he needed, what the kingdom needed, what the moon goddess had always intended for him to find. When they finally broke apart, both glowing with the bond's energy, Demon rested his forehead against hers. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for being brave enough to choose me. Thank you for seeing past the crown to the wolf underneath. Thank you for proving that the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Thank you for finding me in that marketplace, Kira replied. Thank you for being patient while I learned to believe in my own worth. Thank you for showing me that being rejected by someone who never truly saw me was actually the moon goddess pushing me towards someone who does. The formal mating ceremony was held on the next full moon, with wolves from across the Northern Territory gathering to witness their king finally claim his mate. Kira wore white and silver, and when Demon marked her, claiming her before hundreds of witnesses, she felt nothing but joy. The rejected Omega, who'd traded her freedom for a dying wolf, had become a queen. The woman everyone had dismissed as worthless had found a mate who would defend her against armies, and as she looked out at the assembled pack, at wolves who had accepted her despite her lack of noble blood or political connections, at a kingdom that had embraced her because of her compassion, rather than in spite of it, Kira understood something important. Her value had never been determined by whether Marcus accepted her, or whether she could shift perfectly, or whether she had status and power. Her value was inherent, unchangeable, woven into the fabric of who she was. The moon goddess had known it even when Kira herself had forgotten, and she'd arranged circumstances, however painful, to bring Kira to the exact place she needed to be. Years later, when young Omegas would come to Luna Kira, seeking guidance after their own rejections, she would take them to the gardens where she'd once sat with Mordecai, questioning her worth. She'd tell them her story, holding nothing back, the rejection, the 6 months of survival, the marketplace decision that everyone called insane, the night spent tending a wolf who turned out to be a king, and she'd tell them the truth that had taken her so long to learn. Your rejection isn't about your value, she'd say. It's about someone else's inability to recognize what they had. And sometimes the most painful moments of our lives are actually the moon goddess pushing us toward our true destiny. Trust in that. Trust in yourself, and know that somewhere out there, your true mate is searching for someone exactly like you. You just have to survive long enough to find them. And when you do, when you finally meet the wolf who sees your worth without question, you'll understand that every rejection was actually a redirection. Every closed door was actually the goddess protecting you from settling for less than you deserve. The rejected Omega who traded her freedom for a captured wolf became the Luna who changed the Northern Territory forever, implementing policies that protected the vulnerable and valued compassion as much as strength. She proved that the greatest leaders aren't born into power, but chosen by the moon goddess herself, selected not for their status, but for their hearts. And if some young Omega listening felt their hope rekindling, if they left the garden standing taller and believing that maybe their rejection wasn't an ending but a beginning, then Kira knew she'd fulfilled her purpose. She'd become the person she needed when she was lost and hurting. She'd become the Luna who taught that true strength lies in choosing compassion even when the world calls it weakness. The marketplace traders still tell stories about the Omega who made the stupidest trade they'd ever witnessed. But the Northern Territory tells a different story. They tell of the Luna who proved that sometimes the most foolish decisions are actually the wisest choices we'll ever make. They tell of the woman who gave everything and received infinitely more in return. They tell of the rejected Omega who saved a king and discovered she'd been royalty all along, just waiting for someone wise enough to recognize it.